Well, welcome to another episode of the Maginative Weekly Roundup or Review. Chris, good to see your face again.
Always, Richard. Good to see you. How are you doing? How was the week?
Great week, lots of fantastic conversations. Obviously, a lot of conversations about AI, but just in general, I think the markets are certainly alive with lots of changes. Businesses are shifting in both reaction to and anticipation of the technologies that AI is foisting on us. So yeah, lots of good conversations. But this conversation is going to be about the news. Probably the biggest piece of news that came out this week was regulation coming out of the European Union. We've also seen some new models, and of course, a really, really cool autonomous AI agent called Devin, which we're going to get back to in a second. But let's start with the regulation. This is both impressive and also probably a little frustrating for some of the creators of AI models. Tell us a little bit more about what the European Union has actually decided in terms of regulation and policy.
Sure. So there are two different stories around regulation that I think we touched on this week that are worth looking into. The first is that the EU has approved their landmark AI Act. And this was first passed last December, so it's not new. What you're seeing with Europe is that they're going to be implementing very strict regulation around the types of AIs that can be used, the capabilities of the models, and ensuring that the data is being sourced in a proper way. And so
Mhm.
overall, you saw countries like France, who obviously have Mistral and a bunch of leading AI labs, lobbying against this early regulation and hoping for a little bit more flexibility and freedom. But ultimately, it passed, and we're going to start seeing this roll out. And the important thing to note is that this won't happen right away. It's going to actually take maybe the next 2 years to fully roll out. And so a lot can change between now and then. And these labs and these startup companies will have an opportunity to make partnerships or position themselves in a way where it can be possible. Now, I think when you zoom out and think of what this means as a company and as a startup, you're starting to see where regions or countries are looking to get ahead of AI. There's the argument to say that, well, it's way too early. We shouldn't be looking to add regulation at this stage. And others that are saying, you know what, it's better for us to do it now because we saw what happened with things like social media that went unregulated. What are your thoughts on that, Richard?
Yeah, I think every industry has had this conversation, right? The EPA in the US is full of stories like this in terms of environmental damage that's been caused by the unregulated industries. We saw smoking, we saw drinking. A lot of
Hmm.
these industries are regulated in very, very positive ways. We're both parents. We know what it means to age gate alcohol, smoking, certain access to certain things, driving. I don't see why this should be any different. I think we should have regulation, and I'm not a massive fan of regulation, but I do think that regulation that at least takes into account that we're not always going to be ready for the technology when it's ready. So let us kind of blend into that conversation with a little bit of upfront regulation. The EU has already shown us how they've done this with GDPR. They've done it very effectively. So I don't see any reason why this wouldn't be done in a measured way.
How do you actually effect these regulations? I think that will be the big question to ask. Most of these models exist in massive data centers and are sovereign to the countries that are representing them. So if you think of OpenAI, they're based in the US, and it will be interesting to see how much access they end up giving to regulators in Europe in order for them to operate in that space. And you already start to see that with models in China.
Mhm.
American models aren't operating there, and similarly, Chinese models aren't really operating here. And the question is, are we going to see that sort of fragmentation in the AI space
Yeah,
around sovereign AI?
I think the short answer is yes. We just don't know to what extent. Yeah.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about what the UK, uh, in a weird kind of move, have joined the EU's chip joint undertaking. What's that all about? Like a reverse Brexit for chip manufacturers.
Yeah, this is an interesting story, but it underpins the situation that we find ourselves in today around sovereign AI, around the
Mhm.
geopolitics, around access to this technology. What you're seeing here is that the UK has recognized that it's more valuable for them to partner and join up with the EU in order to do research and to progress their efforts with semiconductors. Last year, you saw where the US realized that, hey, you know what? or chip technology is now a national priority, and they limited access to which countries could get the chips. So China wasn't able to get the more advanced chips. Even some countries in the Middle East weren't able to get access to chips. And as a result, you're also seeing these countries respond in kind, where they're building out their own fabs and their own chip industry. Countries are hoping to ensure that they can secure their IP to have more control over the hardware and facilities that will be hosting and managing their AI infrastructure. So, with this move, the UK now will be in a position to participate in broader research and to get access to funding from the EU in order to drive their semiconductor ambitions forward.
Okay, so let's turn our attention to the AI research and models that we heard about this week. News from Tencent, news from Cohere, also something called SIMA, which is new to me. Why don't we start with Tencent? They've proposed a new technique to use LLMs to make diffusion models more accurate. Tell us what
Mhm.
that's all about.
Just as background, diffusion models are usually the models that you see in your image generation AI tools, like your DALI or your Midjourney.
Hmm.
And transformers are typically what you see in your language models, like ChatGPT or
Hmm.
Gemini. And this technique basically says, you know what? We know that transformers and language models are really good at language. What if we could take that capability and ensure that diffusion models can understand
Hmm.
language better? And
Hmm.
so this is a merger of both in a way, so that if you give a complex prompt to a model, it is going to be able to better understand it. And so if you think back a few months when you were given prompts like Midjourney and DALI, maybe it would get some things right and maybe it wouldn't get others right. This is a technique that can be applied on top of any existing diffusion model to make it more accurate. Now, we have also seen a similar technique called diffusion transformers. It's not the same technique, but it's similar in some ways, from OpenAI with the new Sora model, and
Hmm.
also from Stability AI with their new Stable Diffusion 3. And so I think ultimately this is research at its finest. You're seeing competition from China, you're seeing advancements in the West, and everybody's looking to push the state of the art forward with different techniques and technologies.
I do like this synesthesia that's going on. I think that that's kind of an inevitable progression towards what might be, general AI in the sense of like these different data models have to look and feel like a synthesis between data models, not just be siloed in their respective areas of dominance. So, yeah, it's going to be
Exactly.
fun to see. It kind of feels a little bit more like the human brain, which as a biologist really appeals to me. The next one was Cohere. Tell us about that one.
As you know, I'm a big fan of Cohere for enterprise AI solutions. It's cost effective, they have really robust models. And the model they released this week is called Command R. And this is a model that's optimized for retrieval augmented generation. And that's a fancy term that means it can go and look up data within your databases. It can search inventory. It can work with your third party tools. It lowers hallucination and it
Mhm.
provides clear citations. So if you're working in an industry that requires you to ensure that the data that you're giving to your customer needs to be from a very specific data set, it can do a good job in saying, hey, this is where I got my information from. This is my source. It has 128,000 tokens context window, which means that it can hold a lot of data for you to process at a time. So
Yeah.
very, very important model for enterprises. Look forward to seeing a lot of applications built on top of the Command R model.
I think what's really interesting about this is that most people's actual experience of AI is not necessarily LLMs. They're
Hmm.
seeing the RAGs on top of the LLMs. So this is actually going to have a big application benefit for companies because this is the part of the model that is actually used by a lot of people. The referencing tool that's going to the data that's for instance, in an organization that has boundaries or constraints or IP considerations, this is the model that's going to be very valuable for them because it's like, oh, I can go and query my knowledge base within this system, within this organization. That knowledge base, that's what they're looking at. They're not looking at the LLM that's driving that, but rather the RAG that sits on top of it.
Exactly. And a practical application, let's say you have a sales team and you need to have your sales representatives pull up information on the fly. You have a junior sales representative, they need background on a client, they need
Right.
background about the services that you're offering. It can go look at historical data, look at your CRM data, bring that together very quickly for somebody with just natural language prompts to get that information.
Cool. Now, I said I hadn't heard of SIMA, but I actually saw a demo of the product learning how to play a game. And within just, I think it was a brief period of time, 20 minutes or something, it was playing the game better than an expert player was, which kind of blew my mind. My sons both play games, and it does take them a while to kind of get the better of the games. This thing took, like 20 minutes or something.
Yeah, it's a fun way to see the progression of AI in terms of learning. So, Google is no stranger to building models that are great at specific tasks. So,
Mhm.
you remember AlphaGo was great at playing Go by watching others play and then playing against itself. They partnered with 10 different gaming studios, I believe, and
Yeah.
they were able to put them in simulation labs and have the AI just watch others play. So games like No Man's Sky, very popular games among gamers today that are open play. So you can explore and you can do different things in the game that aren't on rails. It's not very scripted.
Yeah.
And impressively, the AI is able to learn to play. And so you started to see scenarios where you can be playing a game and have an AI companion playing the game alongside you. And
Mhm.
so that's a completely novel experience from a gameplay standpoint. And we're bound to see this being applied in different scenarios. So even though they're starting with a game, just like they used AlphaGo to develop models like AlphaFold, which is very good at protein discovery and being applied a lot in biology, you're going to see SEMA being applied across different domains like robotics in terms of learning just from watching other humans in the real world.
Yeah, the big question for me is um, clearly these models are able to learn quickly because they're both being created by humans and also the games are being created by humans. So we're living in that context. What's going to be the bigger question will be at what point do these things start to learn outside of the human context, outside of what we believe? Because if you design it, if humans design a game and then you ask an LLM to go and learn that game, well, yeah, you imagine that that would happen because both human beings were involved in that creative process. But at what point do these models like SEMA and things like that start to think outside the box? We saw a little bit of that with AlphaGo, where it was like starting to play games or play Go specifically in a way that was different to the human experience and come up with new strategies we hadn't seen in thousands of years. That's really my interest here is at what point do we cross that boundary, that event horizon, and say, okay, this is no longer just being looked at through the lens of human experience, but rather what is the experience outside of that?
This is where you're going to start to see the research and the new models that we talk about each week converge. So if you think back a couple of weeks ago when we discussed Sora from
Mm-hmm.
OpenAI, a lot of people look at that just as a video AI model.
Mm-hmm.
But if you were following, we pointed out that OpenAI is using this in order to have AI models simulate 3D environments on its own. And in order for it to simulate 3D environment, it needs to be fairly good at understanding physics and replicating situations like that. And
Right.
so you're going to start to see models ultimately develop and build synthetic data in 3D worlds on their own that they can add a different context and elements to learn from
Mm-hmm.
and train themselves. And so models like Sora that can create these rich 3D contexts will be very important for the growth of future AI models.
Yeah, very impressive. Okay, we're going to turn our attention to some of the new tools that are coming out. These are specifically the AI tools that you and I care about. The big news was a product called Devin, Devin. Um, this is something that we're starting to get a hint of, not just from Devin, but from some of the other applications, and that is things that make things. Tell us more about this specific idea.
I have seen a lot of demos and apps, and very few have impressed me as much as I've been impressed by Devin. And that says a lot. So far in 2024, this is by far the standout feature. I think is going to be a game changer for many. So Devin is an AI software engineer.
Hmm.
It is fully autonomous. And I want to be clear, this isn't a co-pilot where you
Right.
need to have a human in the loop. This is a fully autonomous AI software engineer that you can give a task and it will go out and do that task.
For listeners, this is no longer just about amplifying or improving the productivity or efficiency of the existing employees of an
Mhm.
organization. This is suggesting that you will be able to add this agent, this AI engineer, to your team, and they will live and breathe just like any other member of the team, but without a human being managing them.
Yeah. The repercussions are profound. So the reason why Devin is able to do this is because it is equipped with developer tools like a terminal, a code editor, and even a
Mm.
browser. And it's all sandboxed. However, if you give it a task, it will make a to-do list in terms of how it plans to accomplish the task. And then it will go out and find the information. And I'm going to give you some examples of what we have seen Devin do. And there's an entire article on the website that you can watch the videos, but it can build and deploy entire apps end to end. It can find and debug applications and get rid of bugs, obviously. It can fine tune its own AI models. It can address issues on GitHub. They have even given it tasks on Upwork. So just like a human goes on Upwork, sees a task, bids for it, and then completes it, it is absolutely going to be a game changer. And it is a harbinger of things that will be coming to multiple different industries. Because if you're seeing this in a field like coding and engineering, expect it to come to other domains. And companies will need to start thinking about how they're going to be factoring in AI tools. And you may very well be hiring an AI employee within the next year.
Yeah, we heard from various voices, Sam Altman being probably the most kind of obvious one, that about 95% of marketing positions might be replaced by these kinds of
Yeah.
agents. I don't think that's an exaggeration. We're already
Yeah.
starting to see how absolutely powerful these things are just in the last year. Just to give listeners an idea, about 18 months ago, I was hired as an advisor to a company, and they were looking to cut their costs in terms of advertising expenses, both on the marketing and on the pure advertising front. And an agency that was charging them about $25,000 to $30,000 a year with a team of four, we were able to replicate with a budget of $2,500. That's for all subscriptions and ad spend, and zero people. So that's using four different AI tools. This was 18 months ago, four different AI tools plus $1,200 or $2,500 per month. We were able to get the same results that we were getting from 25 to
Wow.
$30,000 and four people. Now, that's 18 months ago. We're far further down this road. And of course, in the space of another, I don't know, 6 months or whatever, we may start to see Devons for marketing, Devons for design. So you can see very specific applications of this kind of idea, this essentially engineer in a box or marketer in a box.
Exactly.
Okay, cool. Any more on that, or do you want to switch over to Adobe because they've got something in their new Express model?
So I'll talk about Devin a little bit later when we're talking about money in AI because they also
Yep.
raised some money. And so we'll get a chance to dive a little bit deeper into the team and why this is a company that we should be very excited about.
Okay, great. Cool. Adobe, this is really, yeah, it's news, but it's not massive news, right? They're just making it more accessible. That's what I see here.
The big thing here, they released their Adobe Express mobile app that now has generative AI capabilities. So if you're familiar with Firefly that they have been working on over the last year and a half,
Hmm.
all of those capabilities, text to image, generative fill, different text effects, video editing capabilities is coming to the mobile app. And the one thing I'll say is Adobe obviously recognizes that tools like Canva and even startups like Photo Room are eating away at that market share, and so they're being very proactive to say, hey, we get that many people don't want to be using the Photoshops and the illustrators. And so with Adobe Express, they're investing a lot to ensure that it's a great experience And it's super easy for people within an organization to quickly grab their phones and make content for the web.
Yeah, maybe Kate Middleton should have got that. Um, so this is actually part of a bigger trend that you and I have discussed before, and that is design is moving quickly towards a different kind of experience. So
Mhm.
in the past, say 2 decades, we've seen digital design become more complicated. So there are more tools, there are more platforms, there are more uh, also modalities to design for.
Mhm.
And there's been very little substitution effect. So if you're a designer and you're designing something for the web, you're also designing for mobile, you're designing for watch, you're designing for kiosk. A lot of these different modalities are not substitutions, but essentially additions. And the tool set has become bigger and bigger. And one of the things that we pointed out in a previous episode is that for a company like Figma or a company like Canva, their usage model is to try and keep designers designing, where in fact, what we want to have happen is we want to have designers spend less time in those tools. So
Exactly.
there's a fundamental or a, how should we say, a kind of an existential fight between the makers of the product and the users of the product. And that is, we need them to be in the product less, but the product makers would obviously prefer they spend more time there. So we're starting to see Adobe maybe make what I think is a very strategic shift away from the big desktop creative cloud type experience and move towards a much more uh, almost temporary or transitory type of design experience where I've got an idea, I can quickly model it in or prototype it in something like a mobile app. I can use AI to fill in the blanks, and then I can get it out into, either my marketing department, or if I'm a creator, an online creator like a TikTok creator, I can get that on my medium very quickly. So um, it may look like Adobe is abandoning some of its interest by not acquiring Figma, but I actually think that was ultimately a good move. I don't see a future where designers are spending more time in Figma. I see a future where they spend less time in Figma. And I think between AI and just that general trend, we're going to see a change in behavior.
Exactly. I think the opportunity here is to move to the outcome, focusing on adding value where you're delivering an outcome versus a process or a tool that you can use to create. And so the Creative Cloud and Adobe's AI will give it a lot of defensibility as AI develops.
Great, cool. A couple other tools that we want to talk about are DoorDash, Amazon, and Anthropic. So why don't we run through those?
Sure. So three quick updates. DoorDash is a great quality of life update. They introduced AI to make chats safer. So
Mhm.
you're talking about keeping conversations civil and safe for everyone involved. If certain terms are used, if certain language is used, the AI is able to quickly monitor it and ensure that it's not passed on to either the service provider or to the user. And these are the quick wins that I think companies have to start taking to dip their toes in AI. You don't need some fancy, big, splashy AI language model solution, but thinking about how your users are using your tools today and how AI can augment and improve that experience, I think is great. And here, using AI for safety, I think is a no-brainer. With Amazon, we are seeing a really impressive thing. Amazon will allow merchants to just take a link to a URL. So let's say you have a website and you have a product page on your website. You can take that URL and you'll be able to go into Amazon and just give that URL to the AI. The AI will create a product listing page for you. It will take the pictures, it will write the description. This is going to be really important to see as it evolves because lowering that barrier of entry to get your product listed on Amazon will make it even easier for them to attract more merchants. And so when you're a business owner, especially you're running an e-commerce store, you don't want to get bogged down with the mechanics of putting up a store, putting up your products, etc. You want to create great products. You want to create a great experience, and that's what Amazon is ultimately using AI to do.
This is this is a shot across the bow for Etsy, for Shopify, for eBay. If you're a product creator like I am, I have a merchandising store for my artwork and my clothing. If
Hmm.
I want to get that on the web, I do have to jump through a bunch of hoops, and I also have to be on a lot of those different platforms. I got to be on Etsy, I got to be on Shopify, I got to be on eBay, and others as well. Pinterest is kind of entering that scene. But if I can have Amazon do all this work for me, it actually reduces the workload on me and the management of assets. And as we saw with, an experiment that was done even a few years ago, if you take Airbnb as an example, when they started to introduce high quality photos and they started to curate those experiences, the bookings went through the roof, right? So
Yeah.
when people have the tools available to make their products look good and are contextually available to the right audience, things change significantly. So I think this is a sleeper that's going to make a big ripple across the entire e-commerce industry.
Yeah, it'll definitely be important to watch it. The last story is around Anthropic just releasing Claude 3 Haiku.
Mhm.
We covered Claude 3 over the last 2 weeks. What Haiku is the fastest model. It's super fast. It's very cost effective. It's not about being more or less capable. It's really just about speed. And so if you are building, let's say, a chatbot where you're interacting with a customer that's asking a question, you need responses to be almost real time.
Mhm.
Haiku is going to be that model that you want to use, and so you're starting to see model providers like Anthropic specialize and optimize models for different use cases. With Google, with Gemini, you saw Gemini Nano that you can run on a mobile device. Here, Anthropic is really focusing on different enterprises experiences. So you have models like Opus that are very capable, massive context lens, and models that are more optimized for speed like Haiku. And then the models in between, like Sonnet, that are fast enough, but not
Mhm.
necessarily giving you the best speeds, but when you need that middle ground. And the pricing will change accordingly. And
Mhm.
so companies will have the flexibility to use the model that makes sense from a pricing standpoint, but also from a use case standpoint versus just one big model that they have to use for everything.
Okay, cool. Let's shift gears again. We're going to talk a little bit about data, really, but this is a content rich part of the conversation. And that is, we're starting to see the players actively go out and find content partners and create deals with them. We started to see this a few weeks ago. I remember back in Vegas, we saw the deal between Google and Reddit, and we've started to see these kind of slowly but surely enter. Now we're starting to see 4 or 5 stories a week where the models are deliberately and actively choosing to work with the content providers, with the data providers, and say, look, we're no longer going to do this kind of reach around. We're going to have a deal with you. It's going to work out for all of us. We're also skirting around the fact that they have probably been doing some unethical data crawling for a while now, but now they're, instead of being regulated into doing it the right thing, they're actually stepping into this on their own. So tell us more about the specific things that we can expect to see this coming week.
So, Richard, I want to take this opportunity, these stories that we're going to cover, to kind of identify and call out the complexity of AI regulation and ethics, and why conversations need to be had in order for us to determine ultimately the direction that we move in from a point of knowledge and also from multiple perspectives.
Mhm.
So, on one hand, we love the fact that no creators, content providers can get compensated for the content that they have. Again, it's a different story when you think of whether the actual creator, you and I, who are using the tools like
Mhm.
Reddit, end up getting paid, or if Reddit just takes our data and monetize it for
Mhm.
themselves. Different conversation. But that is the first context in terms of how we want to start thinking about data and ownership and how we can monetize it. The second layer is when you think of the first story, Perplexity.
Yeah.
Perplexity has partnered with Yelp to bring their location data into their product. Again, a great partnership, but is it an exclusive relationship? Does it mean that only Perplexity will have access to that Yelp data? What if you're a startup and you're trying to get access to data, but
Yeah.
companies have already established pre-existing licensing deals with one specific LLM? It will be interesting because this could end up creating a very fragmented data landscape. We see where, for example, only Grok has access to Twitter data. For researchers, the question is, as the barrier to entry gets higher because you need to pay millions, apparently OpenAI is paying millions to access and to license data from news providers. We saw that this week also. They
Mm.
are getting data from now the Monde and Prisa and all of the different media companies that they own. and they're apparently paying millions of dollars to license this data per
I
each
mean,
year.
not to sound insensitive, but boo-hoo. I mean, you're, multi-billion-dollar company. You can afford this.
I get that. But what we're also having to consider when you peer this on top of regulation, the barrier to enter in the AI space is now getting harder. And the big companies actually want this because
Mm,
they are well funded. They can afford now to pay out the millions of dollars. But if you're a new startup and you're looking to get into the AI space and all the data that you want now has to
mm,
be either $1 million deals or they're proprietary within companies that have existing licensing
right,
conversations,
right.
it's going to become increasingly harder. And I think as governments think about regulation, they will need to leave opportunities for researchers and for new startups to enter the space and ensure that it's not just cut off by the existing players. And then we also saw where OpenAI is licensing data from Shutterstock for their Sora video model. And so OpenAI is being very aggressive because, of course, they're being sued by the New York Times for using their data. And they tried to work out an agreement with the New York Times. It fell through. But you're seeing where they're not being deterred. They're just going ahead and establishing these deals and relationships with other news providers. And we're not seeing that yet from players like Anthropic. And so the question is going to be, are these exclusive deals, or will these companies also be able to have their data licensed by
Mm.
other AI model providers?
Makes you wonder if you're a producer and you're selling your movie or documentary to Prime Video, does that also mean that it'll eventually find its way into the Anthropic universe?
Very good
Yeah,
question.
big questions here. Cool. Okay, let's talk about money. This is always a fun place to go. Um, why don't we start with Devin? Because you mentioned that earlier. We talked a little bit about this. They've raised another round. What are they going to do with this money?
So Devin, I think
I mean, they're not going to hire
fans.
more engineers, I guess.
I know, right? But check this out. Devin just raised $21 million,
Yeah,
and this is their Series A in an era where companies are raising massive rounds. It is impressive that they have been this disciplined to
hmm,
keep their fundraising just to $21 million. I can guarantee that there are VCs lining up to put money in their pockets
yeah,
because a lot of VCs, a lot of founders this week were talking about what they saw with Devin. They're turning a lot of heads. But what is also impressive is the density of talent that you're seeing within this team. I don't think I've seen many startups that have that many talented engineers and just employees overall. You're talking about Kaggle champions. You have coding competitions in the world for the nerds will appreciate this. And a bunch of these founders are winners. There's a math competition that the founder how is seeing. There's a video circulating on X right now where he's just a kid and the question is asked, and as soon as it's asked, he's ready to answer it. And so you're seeing this density of talent. You're seeing a product that they were able to build that surpasses everybody else in the marketplace today. And so this makes it a company that I'm very excited to watch. I think a lot of other CEOs are looking at Devin as an example for a company that can do a lot more with really concentrated talent.
yeah. Really, really interested to see how this happens. Okay, Applied Intuition secured 250 million. So clearly they're not turning anybody down right now. What's going on with them?
So well, the first thing is Applied Intuition is not a new startup. They were founded in
Right.
2017, relatively speaking, not new.
This is a
And
Series E. This is a
exactly,
yeah. This
exactly.
is
This
an
is their
appropriate
Series
amount.
E, and the domain that they're playing in is with autonomous vehicles. And so
Mhm.
you're seeing where they're building a general purpose AI model for advanced driver assistance systems and also automated driving solutions. And they'll be applied in multiple different vehicles. Porsche and a bunch of prominent venture capitalists and angel investors are part of this deal. Lux Capital, General Catalyst, Andreessen Horowitz. The who's who wants to get in on Applied Intuition. And I think you're going to see this emerge as a very big player in that autonomous vehicle
Mm,
space.
interesting. Yeah. Like I've said before, do we need another car? This is a big question. Okay. Tavus raised 18 million. Why? What do they need to do with this?
Sure. It's interesting because Tavus flew under our radar last year, I think last October or November,
Yeah,
when they raised their Series A. They came out of stealth. And you saw other companies like HeyGen and Synthesia that are creating AI video clones or AI
we
avatars.
actually used for those of you who want to go back and look at some of our you and I did Korean and French and Spanish translations, which were really really impressive. In fact, for those people who are on the fence about this stuff, we were in the room with a translator, and they couldn't tell the difference between our Korean and their
Exactly.
Korean. So it was
Exactly.
really good. Yeah,
And what I'm excited about, Tavos, the product video that they put out for their fundraising is actually impressive because it's made with their tool, and so you're seeing their tool in action. But what makes them unique is that they're providing all of this via APIs also for developers. And so it's not just, hey, we're building an end product solution for consumers. We're building APIs. So for companies that need this technology and this functionality within their applications, they'll now be able to leverage these APIs to do it. And so, interestingly, you're seeing HubSpot as an investor here, but great tool, great backend. If companies like a HubSpot end up wanting to give their customers capabilities where you upload a sales video that can be personalized for every single customer that you send your video out to, how impressive would that be, right? And this is going to be possible with Tavus's technology.
so cool. Yeah, yeah. And then the last one was physical intelligence. They raised 70 million to build AI powered robots. Is this similar to what we saw last week? What's actually going on here?
Sure. So physical intelligence, aka Pi. By the way, Pi Day was yesterday, I believe,
That's right. Yeah.
and it was just the biggest fail that they didn't have their announcement on Pi Day. They announced it the day before. But physical intelligence is taking a different stab at robotics. So it's not like some of the other robotic companies that we have seen, like Figure, that are doing amazing things with OpenAI. What they're looking to build is the robot brain that can be used in basically a wide range of robots. So, an AI model for robotics, generally speaking.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so, they are not as focused on the actual hardware as they're looking to be fascinated with developing a general purpose model that can be then licensed to robotic providers. And so, if you think of a similar setup with the car, Google makes autonomous driving capabilities with their mobile eye solutions. But in the end, they will ultimately want to license this to traditional car manufacturers. I think that's the play that physical intelligence is looking to do. They understand that robotics hardware is going to be a challenge in and of itself, and there are companies that are very good at it. They
Yeah.
want to focus on building the software that they can then run on top of any hardware out there. So exciting development. I'm looking forward to seeing how they progress.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious about this, both with applied intuition and physical intelligence. We saw last year that the CEO of Ford said that one of the reasons why Tesla had gained such a massive advantage over traditional car manufacturers was that they were completely vertically integrated. They were literally going from, the nuts and bolts all the way through to the software, and that Ford was going to be creating a similar kind of division within Ford, where they would build their uh, electric cars or their new generation cars like that, where they would have full integration. I think I can't remember the exact number, but he said that they wanted to avoid working with the average of 400 other outside providers. So I'm interested to see how that evolves. Whether an organization like Ford or GM, we just saw GM's lost two very very senior people. Their head of software, SVP or EVP of software, left for medical reasons, and they also lost and kind of a 44-year-old veteran of that organization, both of which were working on new generation products. So kind of this is an open question. I don't think there's an answer to this, but I'm just generally curious as to what's going to happen, whether these strategies of being vertically integrated are going to work, and whether they will be able to catch up with other companies. Certainly, their sales suggest that they're getting there. Um, Lightning sales and things like that were really high
Hmm.
this year or this past year. not without their problems, but we're starting to see manufacturers like Kia. I spoke to them. We saw some amazing new products coming out.
Hmm.
They do seem to be catching up, and Tesla seems to be losing market share, but the market is also expanding. So it's hard to be clear
Exactly.
about what's going to happen.
Exactly. And that's really it for this week. There are more stories, obviously, on the website. If you haven't done so, I highly encourage you to hop on over to Maginative.com. There are lots of stories there, but you can also subscribe to get our weekly update newsletter that gives you a digest right in your inbox with all the stories, along with some additional insight. We will be providing this week the initial recordings that we have for our new podcast that is coming out. We had some amazing guests on in different domains that I think people will absolutely love. And finally, in the next month, I'll be up in Boston with Richard talking at the Imagination in Action conference at MIT. And this is a star studded lineup. If you're a business owner and you're thinking of a business conference to go about AI this year, this is the one to go to. Check it out. We'll provide links in the description. But it was an amazing week. Great chatting with everybody. As always, great chatting with you, Richard.
Great. Good to see you again. Thanks, Chris.
All right, everyone. Take care. One love.